Good morning, afternoon, or evening, cats and dogs. I've got a video for you to talk a little bit about how you can use your calculator to be successful on some of our future units. In this unit, we're going to be using our calculators to do basic calculations with adding and subtracting with positives and negatives. You might be using it for exponents, um, different things like that. So I want to point out a few key buttons that you're going to need to be familiar with on your calculators. So you're going to notice in the next few slides that I have multiple types of calculators. These are the most common calculators that I see students using. Obviously, I can't put every possible calculator on this video, and you might need to skip around if your calculator is shown, or at least one really similar to your calculator. That may be where you want to skip to kind of look through the video. I'm starting with the calculator that's on the screen right now because this happens to be the type of calculator I have in my classroom and that a lot of students also have. So I'm going to begin with this one, then we'll move on to a different type of calculator. And I just want to show you some of the key buttons that I think you're going to need to be familiar with for this first unit. So if we're looking at this calculator, I first want you to be familiar. You've got your basic operations here along the right-hand side. You have your equal sign down at the bottom here, and I'm just going to hover my mouse over that. You will sometimes use these buttons to scroll around. You've got a clear button. You have a delete key that I'll kind of mention a little bit later. You also notice that some of these things are above a button. So you can see them on this calculator, they happen to be a purplish color. The calculator that I have that is pink, it's actually a yellowish color there. But these things that are above the other buttons, the way we access them is we hit the second key, and then you hit the button that is below whatever you're trying to click on or access. For right now, we're not doing any fractions, at least in this unit. We won't need our fraction key and using those. But once we get to that, we might need the second key a little bit more often. Our on key is down here. We'll talk about how to turn off your calculator in a little bit. Our major number buttons are right here as well. So let's begin by talking about where our negative key is. So I'm going to circle the negative key here on the calculator. I'm going to circle it in yellow so we can see it pretty well here. So our negative key is actually right here. Make sure that you're not using and I'm just going to put yellow so we can color code that. Make sure that you're not using the subtraction key for your negative. I've seen students when they're trying to do a problem like -5 minus -2, they'll hit the subtraction key and use that as their negative, and it will probably give you an error message. Please know if the calculator is giving you an error message, then you're doing something wrong. So it's not a foolproof method. While calculators are really useful, if you aren't pressing the buttons correctly or pressing the correct buttons, you're probably going to get the wrong solution. And I'm going to give you an activity that you're going to need to complete where you're practicing using the calculator to do some calculations. It's important that you're able to use that technology appropriately or correctly. So sometimes you're also going to be asked to use parentheses in problems, and I'll have some of these as well. I'm going to circle this in orange, but your parentheses are right here on this calculator. And if you have a calculator similar to this, your parentheses might be around the same position. So the beginning parentheses and the end parentheses. This is really important when you're working with exponents. For example, if you're doing something like -5 to the second power. I'll make this an exponent here. If you're doing -5 to the second power, then you want to make sure you put that -5, the base, in parentheses. If you don't, it's probably going to get you a solution of -25, which technically is not correct. It should be +25. So you may want to locate where the parentheses are on your calculator because you might have to use them at certain times. So for the exponents, I'm going to outline the exponents. We'll do this in, let's try to do kind of like a light purple here. So our exponent keys are actually going to be right here on the calculator. There's a couple of them circled. So the one on the bottom here says x to the second power. That is if you're going to square a number. So if you are going to do, let's say, 5 to the second power, you'll plug 5 in and hit the x squared key, and that will give you 25. If you're doing -5 squared, you're going to need to put -5 in parentheses, then hit the x squared key. That's only if your exponent is 2. The upside down v, though, is going to be used for pretty much any other exponent. So if I want to do, for example, 7 to the 8th power, so I'm going to make that an exponent here. If I'm going to do 7 to the 8th power, what I'm going to plug into my calculator, I'm going to hit the 7 button, I'm going to hit the upside down v here, and then I'm going to hit the 8 button. So I'll do 7 upside down v8, and that will give me my solution. In fact, let me calculate that on my own calculator. It's a really big number. You end up getting, let me put this right next to it, equals 5764801. So that will be 5,764,801. So you get a really big answer there. And it may not be a bad idea for you to practice plugging that into your calculator if you have this type of calculator. For clearing, I'm going to go ahead and outline this in, let's go with gray. So if we're going to clear, that's going to be here. I'm also going to outline the delete key at the same time, both of these. These are going to be the keys that we're going to use if we want to clear the entire screen. You don't have to clear after each question, but if you're going to clear the screen, use this. If you make a mistake and you need to delete as you're typing something in, you can use just the delete key. That way you're not clearing everything, just whatever you just plugged into your calculator. So these two buttons might be used periodically by you. Now, I want to talk about turning it off, and then we'll go back to clear memory. So turning off your calculator, I'm going to go ahead and circle this in like a dark green color. So turning off your calculator, you can see the off button like right here. It's above the, whoa, don't want that. See if I can get that to delete. It's my fault. I don't want that to cover that up. So let me try circling again. We want the line to be green and not filled at all. See if that'll work for us. Yeah, that's what we want. So for turning our calculator off, it will turn off automatically eventually, but this button down here, which I now need to change the color again. Bear with me. It's been a long week. So our line color is going to be a dark green. We're going to use the same thing to outline this guy in. But in order to get that, as I mentioned earlier in the video, you're going to want to make sure that you hit the second key and then the on button to turn your calculator off. Again, your calculator should turn off automatically after a certain period of time, but I often get students asking, well, how do I turn it off? Second, and then press the on button, and that will turn your calculator off. I also wanted to mention how to clear the memory. So these calculators, most of them will have a button on the back that's a reset button. You can find it probably like in the top left-hand corner that you can press with a pencil point, and that will clear the memory. And there's other options you have as well. There's a reset button down here at the bottom. It says reset. So if you hit second and then 0, it'll pop up with a reset N and then Y. So you want to scroll over to the Y, hit equals or enter, and it'll say mem cleared, meaning the memory is cleared. Now that's like scary to do on, let's say, a cell phone or a computer, but for something like this, it's not really a big deal to clear the memory. And again, I'm just going to outline that reset button, which you'll need the second key to do. It's not a big deal to do it on your calculator because you don't have a lot stored in there, but that may be necessary if your calculator is doing something weird. And I point this out because if you're taking a test or a quiz, or let's say you're taking the PSSAs, or in high school the SATs, you're not going to be able to ask the teacher or the person monitoring the test how to clear the memory on your calculator. They're not going to be able to help you. So if it's ever doing something really weird, like it's giving you answers that you know don't make sense, try resetting it. Hit second, 0, and then again, you can follow the reset directions to clear the memory. Sometimes some of the calculators will allow you to hit like the clear and equal sign at the same time, or clear and off at the same time, to clear the memory. That could also work as well. There are other options, but I want you to at least be familiar with that. So for this calculator, these are the basic functions that you're going to need to be familiar with in terms of this unit. Future units, when we start working with fractions more or later on in the unit, what I will do is introduce the fraction keys as well, just to make sure we're familiar with how to use them. There's going to be a lot of buttons on these calculators that this year we're not going to use. In fact, the only other ones that we're really going to use this year will be the fraction keys, pi, and we might use the square root buttons as well a little bit later on. The one thing I do want to mention is you might see this word fix above the decimal point here. If your calculator ever says fix on there, it's probably going to do something really funky. I'm not 100% sure what it is without looking it up again, but it will start to do something really funky and it's not going to work correctly for you. So again, you just want to clear the memory or reset your calculator. All right, again, if this is your calculator, you probably don't need to watch the rest of this video because you're going to be pretty familiar with how to use this calculator. What I want to do is go on to the next type of calculators. I put both of these up because they're very, very similar, and so I'll kind of point to both of these. But these are Texas Instruments calculators as well. They're multi-view calculators, which I really like because they'll actually save your work in there. So you definitely don't want to clear every time because you can scroll up. You can use these arrow buttons. It's kind of like a game control. You can scroll up, and that way if you're calculating something and you're not sure where you're making your mistake and you need me to look back through your work, I can actually do that by scrolling back through what you've done. So let's talk a little bit about the negative key to start off with. And I'm going to circle this in yellow. I may not use the same colors as I did for the last one, so just bear with me. But I'm going to circle the negative key in yellow, and that's going to be down here. And I'm going to slide this up so you can see a little bit better. But your negative keys are pretty similar to where our last calculators were, which are in like the bottom right-hand corner. The enter key is basically your equal sign or your equal key to find your solution. So that's going to be also down here in the bottom right-hand corner. Should point out basic operations here. You've got your numbers, you've got your decimal point, you've got your second key, might be different colors depending, but that's going to help you get to those things that are up above the other buttons and other keys. All right, so next is parentheses, and I'm going to outline this in, let's go ahead and do like a purplish color. So parentheses are right here and right here on these. Again, you're going to kind of use them like we did in our um, last calculator as well, putting them in at the beginning and at the end. So parentheses, again, are just going to go around, especially if you have, and I'm going to point this out again, if you have something like -5 as your base to the second power, you do need to put the parentheses around the base if it's negative. So I do want you to be familiar with where those keys are. The exponent keys on this calculator are very similar to the last one as well. So I'll go ahead and outline this in, let's just go ahead and do this in red. So that's going to be these buttons right over here. Ah, craziness, Mrs. Garcia. You got this handled. Line color is red. We don't want that. So let's see if we can get this to function for us. Ah, it's going to make me crazy. So outline in red, not fillets. We'll go ahead and do the same for this calculator. These are going to be our two exponent keys, very similar to the last calculator if you are paying attention. The x to the second power is going to be used specifically if you're going to square something. So if I'm going to do 4 to the second power, I'm going to do 4 and then hit the x squared key. If my base is negative though, again, I think it's really important that you make sure you put the parentheses around it first. Otherwise, again, it might give you the incorrect solution. I will point out that there's been times where students have said, well, it's not giving me the incorrect solution. It's actually giving me the correct solution even though I'm not putting the parentheses in. That also happens, but most times if you don't put the parentheses in around a negative base, it's going to give you the wrong solution. So again, this key is specifically used for raising something to the second power. The upside down V is used for any other exponent. I just want to make sure I circle these things as well. I apologize for those circles being absurdly large. Get that straightened out for us. So if I want to do something like 7 to the 8th power, which is the same problem I used on the last the last slide, I'm going to plug in 7, and then, so I'll hit 7, I'll do the upside down V, and then I'll hit the 8. And that's going to get me a really big number. So I cleared my memory on the last calculator. It's going to get me a solution of 5,764,801. So really big number. And again, you'll have a chance to practice this as well to get used to using your calculators. All right, so for clearing these, your clear button, I'll go ahead and outline in, let's do gray in this case. So clear button's going to be here, here, and we'll outline this as well. I keep forgetting to do that. So that will clear everything that's on your screen. I think you might have to hit it a couple times to clear like everything. But again, you don't necessarily need to do that. Your delete key also going to be important for us. I'm going to circle this as well in gray. So your delete key is here, and that's going to be really useful if you just want to delete one thing, if you type something in wrong. Your calculator is only as smart as you, so if you plug something in wrong, it's going to calculate it wrong. So you want to make sure that you're very precise with how you plug that in. So your delete key outlined also in a grayish color for us. Talking a little bit about turning your calculator off, very similar to the last calculator. I'll highlight this in blue. Your off key is going to be bottom left-hand corner. It's above the on key, but you need to hit second and press on, and it will turn your calculator off. It should do it automatically after a period of time, but just in case you want to turn it off right away. I think this is important, especially if you're going to be shoving your calculator into your backpack. If it's on, this is where your calculator might start to do something a little weird or funky. So let's talk a little bit about clearing the memory. And I believe this one is the same. I'm having a hard time reading down there, but I know this one, for example, there's a reset button down here above the 0, kind of like it was for the last calculator. So I'm going to highlight this in, we'll do like a light blue. So, I keep doing that, Mrs. Garcia. Again, been a really long week for us. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight in light blue your reset key. I want the line color to be light blue and inside to be clear. Blah. It keeps doing that. All right. Playing around with me here. Let's go ahead and try outlining. That's what I'm going to need. Let's move this over and extend it. Sort of ish. So we'll do that in a light blue, and we'll do the same thing down below here for your reset keys. That's going to be above your 0. So when you go to do that, you're going to want to hit the second key and then 0, and it'll give you instructions on how to reset. It is really important that you do that if your calculator is doing something sort of funky. You don't have to do that on a regular basis, but if it is giving you answers that you think don't make sense, try resetting it and see if that works to fix the problem. That does happen periodically. I do want to mention this double arrow in the bottom right-hand corner. If, for example, it's giving you an answer that you want as a decimal, but it's not giving you the answer as a decimal, this button is going to be really important. The double arrow is above the enter key as we go on towards this year. So try to keep that button in mind when we start talking about fractions, when we start talking about square roots, and when we start working with pi as well. That button is going to be really important. So again, just main keys here, exponent keys, obviously how to turn it on and off, your negative key, which you want to make sure you use for a negative instead of the subtraction sign, since that will not work. Parentheses, delete, and clear are also going to be very important. All right, let's move on to the next type of calculator. And again, if your calculator, make sure you're finding a calculator similar to yours in this video. There should be one pretty similar to what you have. If it's absolutely different than all of them in this video, just let me know. Maybe send me a picture of the calculator, and I can maybe make you a short video to introduce some of these buttons as well, or talk to me in class. That also works. So this is another Texas Instruments calculator, one that I see a lot. So it's going to be pretty similar to the other calculators also. but there are some slight differences. So you've got your operations along the right-hand side. You've got your numbers right here. You do have exponent keys that we'll talk about in a moment. You've got your second key for these yellow things that are up above the other buttons. A lot of these buttons we're not even going to use this year. You may never use. In fact, there's buttons on here that students have been like, what does this mean? I'm like, honestly, it's been a while since I've used them. I did use the sin, cos, and tan, sine, cosine, and tangent with geometry a few years ago. So if you take geometry in high school, you'll work through these buttons. And I believe we use the logarithm buttons as well. But let's talk about the negative key, 'cause it's a little different on this calculator. So let me get my circles straight because they've been driving me crazy today. But our negative key is actually here right next to the equal sign. And what's different about this calculator, and I dislike this a lot, is you actually have to put the number in first and then hit this key to change it to a negative. And if you press it again, it'll change it positive. Press it again, it'll make it negative. But this is going to be your negative key. Parentheses, let me go ahead and point those out as well, which you sometimes may need to use. They're going to be pretty similar spot to the other two calculators. Again, this is really useful if you're trying to do something like -5 to the second power. I'm going to use that many times. That base, since it's negative, needs to be in or in parentheses. So you will have to use those. I believe these kind of look a little weird because you'll plug in the parentheses, put in the -5. So you'll have to do beginning parentheses 5, hit the negative key, end parentheses, and then do your exponent. So this one it's not my favorite calculator. I actually use this a lot growing up, but we've advanced quite a bit since this calculator. So I'm not saying you have to get a new one if this is the one you have, but it can be a little bit more of a challenge than other calculators. So your exponent key, let's talk about where that is on this calculator. So we're going to begin with the x squared key on this, guys. Let me go ahead and circle that. I'm going to do that in, let's do that in red. So your x squared key is going to be right here. Again, this is for exponents. If you're trying to use any other exponent, you're actually going to use this button. So it's a little bit different than the upside down V for the others. So for example, if I'm going to do, let's say 5 squared, I'll plug in 5, hit the x squared key. And for some of these calculators, it might just be a matter of playing around with the calculator to see how to use some of these buttons. If I'm going to do any other exponent, like again, that same example, 7 to the 8th power, let me show you how to do this. You are going to do 7, hit the y to the x key, just like the upside down V, hit 8, and then hit equals. So that's how the exponent key is going to work there. So it's a little bit of a different spot than some of the other calculators. To clear for your calculator, you're basically going to use the on button. So I'll circle this in, not the text color, get my circle here. You're going to use the on button if you're trying to clear it. I've had some students ask about clearing the memory for this calculator, so I'm just going to kind of talk through that. To clear the memory for this one, you should be able to just turn it off and back on, and it should clear any mistakes that it's making. It may have a reset button on the back also if it's really doing something crazy. So I'm not going to really circle that here, but if you do need to clear the memory, just turn it off and back on, and it should be good to go. For the delete key for this one, I don't believe there is, oh, yep, I lie. There is one in the bottom left-hand corner, so you can use that to delete digit by digit. So let me go ahead and circle that in, we'll do light blue in this case. So again, if you want to delete anything, use this button in the bottom left-hand corner. You could, of course, again, just hit the clear button, but then you have to retype everything back in. To turn this calculator off, it is super easy. It's one of the easiest calculators to turn off. We'll go ahead and circle this in like an orange color. Just hit the off button. So pretty basic. So there's good things about this calculator, and this is true with pretty much any calculator. There's going to be some really good things. There's going to be some things that aren't as good. But it's just a matter of playing around with the calculator. As much as you guys are born and raised in a technology world, I do think there's also a lot of students who aren't familiar with how to use calculators appropriately, and it can be a really great tool for us. All right, so this last calculator, it's a Casio. A lot of you may have a calculator that's the same type or very similar to it. So it might be a different color, but it's got a similar look. So again, I apologize if you've listened to all of this and this is the calculator you have. Hopefully you kind of skipped to where you needed to be. Let's go through some of the basic keys here. We have our like turning it on and clearing button, our delete key, our equal sign, our operations. We have our digits and decimal point. We have a lot of extra things up here. We've got shift, alpha. So those kind of match with the colors that you see above the buttons down below, of which we won't use many of them, but there will be a few that we'll have to come to when we talk about square roots and cube roots, when we talk about mixed numbers and so forth. So let's talk about one of the first most important keys probably is our negative key. So our negative is going to be sort of in a different spot than the other calculators. It's going to be right up here. It's in parentheses, just to point it out there, but you can see that negative key, um, about a third of the way down on the left-hand side. So again, you're going to plug that in and then put whatever number that's going to be negative in there. Parentheses, very similar spot to the other calculators. Let's go ahead and circle this in blue. Ooh, parentheses are going to be right here for us. So again, if you're putting in something like that -5 to the second power, oh good, my text is even blue here. If you're going to put -5 to the second power, you're going to have to put parentheses around the -5. So parentheses, -5, end parenthesis, and then we'll talk about the exponent key here in just a moment. All right, so exponent key, let's go ahead and circle this in. Let's do a light blue for this one. So the exponent key, we've got two of them right here. So it's these two guys. If you're going to do something squared, you can hit this button as soon as you put the number in. So -5, just hit this button and it'll square it. If you're doing any other exponent, you're going to put the base number in and then you're going to have to use this to kind of toggle around. It's just sort of like a game console or a computer. So play around with these arrows a little bit. You might even, I think you can even press this first and then just kind of like bounce around to plug in the numbers, including the exponents. This is where you want to play around with the calculator a bit. I can help you with it. It's easier if your calculator is right in front of me, of course. That's why I'm trying to just give you a video with as much detail as possible. I also realize that it's not perfect in this case. So for 7 to the 8th power, you're going to do 7. You can hit this button and then toggle up here using these arrows to plug in the 8 and hit equals. Again, I do think if you plug this in first, then you can put like the 7 and then the 8 in, but that may be something to play around with. Different versions of the Casio calculator might be slightly different as well. To clear, I kind of already mentioned this before. I'm going to go ahead and circle this in green. So you can just hit this AC button to clear. You've probably seen similar buttons to that before. The delete button, I'm also going to circle this in green since it's right next to it. This would be if you just want to delete one digit at a time. All right, let's talk a little bit about turning this calculator off. Trying to see, oh, it's going to be above the AC button. So in order to turn this calculator off, let me go ahead and circle this one in green. So you're going to have to hit the shift key and then off is right up here. It's in a darker green. So if you hit shift and then the AC button, it will turn your calculator off. For this calculator, if you are trying to clear the memory, you can hit, I'm just sliding this out of the way because we're going to need this space here. But one way to clear this memory, a lot of times what happens is the mode or the setup gets messed up. But I believe for clearing the memory, and this one I have a little bit less experience with, and every year I swear someone comes up to me with a new calculator that I haven't seen before. So again, these are things that if you're like, I have a question about how this works, bring your calculator in. I know for my core students, you may have to just show it to me via Zoom. But we can hopefully try to figure things out if you're struggling with using your calculator. But to clear the memory, just to kind of talk through this here, you're going to need to make sure that you hits, and someone just walked into my room. Gonna make sure that you hit the shift key followed by the 9 key. The CLR here means to clear, and it should give you the option. I don't have one of these right in front of me right now, but it should give you the option of clearing the entire memory. There might be some steps to follow. Again, you might want to check the back of your calculator and see if there's a reset button as well. I do want to stress that every calculator is different. And again, I see new calculators pretty much every year, every other year. So if you're struggling, please ask. These are the only keys at this point that I really want to make sure that you are familiar with. We will talk about some of the other keys as we move on, but I will try to help you through this as best as we can since calculators are an excellent tool for us. So after watching this, I'm going to give you some questions to try using your calculators that I think are really important for you to get some practice with, um, to practice using your calculators moving forward. All right, I appreciate you listening. I know it was a long video, but hopefully you are only listening to the parts that applied to you and the calculator that you have. I do have calculators in the classroom should you need to borrow one for some of the things we're going to do as well. It's just going to be important that we keep them as clean as possible throughout this school year. I appreciate you listening, and we'll see you in the next video.